There is a particular kind of silence that follows a battle. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of rest. It is something heavier, something that presses against the inside of your skull and reminds you, with every heartbeat, of all the sounds that used to be there and are no longer. Staff Sergeant Darius Kael had learned the name for that silence 8 years into his service with the Galactic Terran Alliance's 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force. He had heard it on Callist 7th, when the firestorm swallowed the last of the Kreth artillery and the jungle went from a screaming hell to an impossible hush. He had heard it again on the orbital platform above Ven's Crossing, when the emergency bulkheads slammed shut behind him, and he realized he was the only one left on the right side of that door. He had heard it most painfully of all, on a Tuesday evening 19 months ago, in a medical facility on New Corinth, when a nurse with kind eyes had gently turned off the monitors beside 2 beds, and the soft beeping that had become the rhythm of his world simply stopped. He was very, very familiar with that silence. It followed him like a debt he could not pay. The wreckage field of what had once been the GTA diplomatic cruiser Serene Path stretched across nearly 400 kilometers of open space, turning slowly in the gravitational pull of the Velani Drift, a loose scattering of asteroid clusters that served as a natural waypoint on the outer edge of Aelhari territory. The Serene Path had been a beautiful ship, by all accounts. He had never seen it whole. He had only ever seen it like this, in pieces, spinning fragments of hull plating, the shattered ring of its navigation array still blinking with the ghost of an automated distress signal, corridors exposed to vacuum, their contents scattered across 10,000 kilometers of cold nothing, personal effects, cargo containers, a child's plaything that tumbled past the forward viewport of his shuttle, its soft forms spinning and spinning, never landing anywhere, never coming to rest. He looked away from the viewport. Kael. The voice belonged to Corporal Yenna Torres, his second in command, and the closest thing he had to a friend in the universe, which said more about his current state than he would have liked to admit. She was sitting at the sensor console, running the sweep for the 3rd time. I've got 3 confirmed life signs. Faint, very faint. Cluster around what used to be the secondary medbay, Section 14 Delta. Faint how? 2 of them look like they might be crew. The readings are consistent with standard human physiology, but they're barely registering. Hypothermic, possibly. Whatever hit the Serene Path, it happened fast. She paused. The 3rd one is Aelhari. Kael stood up from the pilot's seat. His joints made the sounds that joints make when a man has slept in his armor one too many times, which in his case was approximately every night for the last year and a half. He rolled his neck. He picked up his helmet from the seat beside him and held it in both hands without putting it on. One Aelhari survivor, he said. Biosign is small, Torres said. Consistent with a juvenile, the shuttle bay doors at the rear of their small craft, the Minnow, a designation he had given it himself because the GTA had assigned it, the deeply uninspiring call sign Retrieval Craft Delta 7, cycled with a familiar hydraulic hiss. Outside, 2 more Marines from their team were suiting up. Corporal Hank Dressler, who was as wide as he was tall, and had the kind of unshakable calm that only came from either great wisdom or a profound lack of imagination, and Private First Class Anaya Reese, who was 23 years old and had the misfortune of being the most earnest person Darius Kael had ever met. "What are we walking into, Sarge?" Reese asked, snapping her helmet ring into place. "Debris field. Possible structural collapse inside whatever hull sections are still intact. Environmental controls will be down." He thought about the 3rd biosign, small, Aelhari. "We move fast, we move careful, and we don't leave anyone behind." "Not today, not any day," Dressler said, with the simple certainty of a man who had always believed it. Kael finally put his helmet on, the seals engaged with a soft click, the heads-up display populated across his visor, oxygen levels, suit pressure, the biosign markers that Torres was transmitting from the shuttle's sensors, 3 small red dots pulsing in the dark ahead of them. He pressed the activation key for the mag tethers. "Move out," he said, and they went into the silence. Character introduction and inciting incident. The interior of the serene path smelled like burning and cold. Even through the environmental filtration systems of his suit, Kael could tell. There was a particular character to the air inside a destroyed vessel. The lingering traces of combustion, of chemical retardants, of metal heated far past its designed tolerances. When the atmosphere was thin enough, it carried that smell with a particular sharpness, the way cold air always sharpened everything it touched. The mag boots clicked against the hull plating as they moved through what had been the main corridor of Section 12. The gravity systems were down in this section, which meant they were walking sideways relative to where they had started, the floor now a wall, and the ceiling now somewhere else entirely. Dressler had reoriented on approach and guided them in through a breach in the outer hull that had been sealed by emergency foam, expandable polycomposite, the kind that bought you hours rather than days, and from the look of it, these hours were nearly spent. 2 minutes to the first biosign cluster, Torres said in his ear from the shuttle. "Copy," Kael said. "We've got structural instability in 12 Bravo. Ribs are bending. I see it on scan. The section should hold. Keyword should. Love your confidence, Torres. I have exactly the right amount of confidence for this situation." He pushed through a collapsed pressure door, bending a section of it back with the assist of his exoframe. Behind it was what had been a maintenance corridor, and at the end of that corridor, the reinforced hatch of the secondary medical bay. The hatch was warm to the touch of his gauntlet, not the warmth of a fire still burning, but the residual warmth of a space that had been sealed quickly, that had retained heat through whatever catastrophe had torn everything else apart. Emergency sealing. Someone inside had done this deliberately, in the moments before or during the disaster. Someone had been thinking, someone had been trying to survive. "Thermal differential," Reese said, pressing her own hand against the hatch. "Heat on the other side. Atmosphere too. The seals are holding." "Manual override," Kael said. Dressler produced the override tool from his kit and applied it to the hatch mechanism. It took 45 seconds, the longest 45 seconds of a mission that had barely begun, before the hatch groaned, hissed, and then opened inward. The first thing that came through the opening was air. Warm, breathable, tasting of recycled oxygen, and something organic and strange, something that reminded him distantly of the smell of rainfall on the plains of New Corinth, back when rainfall on the plains of New Corinth had been a thing he noticed and named and cared about, rather than simply another sensory detail in a universe full of sensory details he could no longer bring himself to want. The second thing that came through the opening was a sound. It was small, barely a sound at all. More the idea of a sound than the thing itself. A trembling, high-frequency exhalation, somewhere between a breath and a whistle, the kind of sound that a living thing makes when it is trying very hard to be quiet, but cannot quite manage it, because it is too frightened and too alone. Kael went through the hatch first. The secondary medical bay of the Serene Path had been designed for 12 patients. It had emergency provisions, backup atmosphere generation, and reinforced walls meant to serve as a crisis shelter in the event of hull breach. Whoever had designed it had done their job well. The room had survived nearly intact, while everything around it burned. There were 2 human crew members, a medical officer, and what appeared to be a diplomatic aide, both alive, both in survival cocoons that they had managed to activate before the worst of it hit. Their biosigns were weak but stable, hypothermic, as Torres had suggested. They would need warming packs and medical attention, but they would survive the next hour without it. Kael moved past them. He was listening. The sound came again, from the far corner, behind the overturned bulk of a med-bay storage unit that had broken free from its mounts and come to rest against the wall at an angle, creating a small triangular space between its underside and the floor. He moved toward it carefully. He crouched, He did not lead with his weapon. He had not even drawn his weapon. There were some instincts that survived even grief, and the one that told him not to point a gun into a corner where a small, frightened living thing was hiding was one of them. "Hey," he said. His voice was rougher than he intended. It was always rougher than he intended these days. "Hey, it's okay, we're not going to hurt you." Silence. Then the sound again, that trembling exhalation, closer now. "My name is Darius," he said. He did not say sergeant. He did not say marine. "We're here to help. The ship is damaged, but we have a safe vessel nearby. We're going to take you somewhere warm." A pause that stretched like a held breath. And then something moved in the darkness behind the storage unit, and a small hand appeared at the edge, if you could call it a hand. 3 long, delicate fingers, jointed in ways that human fingers did not joint, with the faintest luminescence at the fingertips, the kind of bioluminescent quality the Aelhari were known for, that soft living light that pulsed with heartbeat and emotion. The light was very dim, almost gone, like a candle down to its last fraction of an inch of wick. He waited. He did not reach for the hand. He let it find him. It took a full minute. He counted the seconds without meaning to, the way a person counts things when the alternative is thinking. And then a child came out from behind the storage unit and stood before him. He had never been this close to an Aelhari before. He knew them by reputation, by documentation, by the GTA briefings that described them as a gentle species, highly empathic, one of the founding members of the Council of Aligned Worlds, a people who had been civilization when humanity was still working out the finer points of fire. They were not physically imposing. They were small, smaller than humans, with a delicacy to their structure that made them seem breakable. They communicated as much through bioluminescent patterns as through sound, which meant that a trained reader could theoretically know what an Aelhari was feeling simply by watching the light play across their skin. What Kael could read was this: she was terrified, and she had been terrified for a very long time. The light that moved across her was dim and irregular, flickering with the biorhythms of exhaustion and fear. Her 2 antennae, which on a healthy Aelhari would have been alert and responsive, were pressed flat against her head in the posture he vaguely recalled from the briefings as meaning danger, and do not move, and I am very small, and I do not want to be found. She was looking directly at him. She had eyes that processed light differently from human eyes, designed for a different sun, and he was aware that she was reading him in ways he could not fully read her. She was looking at his face, at his hands, which he held open and visible at his sides, gauntlets off because he had removed them at some point without quite deciding to, and she was making some calculation. Whatever that calculation was, it reached its conclusion, because she took one more step toward him and said something in Aelhari that his translation module rendered imperfectly, with the slightly tinny delay of real-time processing as, "The lights went out. I could not find anyone. I waited." "You did exactly right," Kael said. "You waited, and we came. That's exactly what you were supposed to do." Her antennae lifted fractionally. The light at her fingertips pulsed once, briefly, in the color his module tagged as uncertain/asking. "Are you a soldier?" she asked. "Yes. My mother said soldiers were coming. She put me in here and sealed the door and said the soldiers would come." A pause, in which the bioluminescence flickered through a complex pattern his module struggled to pass. She did not come back. Darius Kael had been to the place beyond grief. He had lived there for 19 months. He knew its geography the way you know the geography of a place you cannot leave, and he was intimately familiar with the specific quality of silence that descended in the moment after a child stated, in simple declarative language, the most irreversible fact of her young life. He sat down on the floor of the medical bay, which was not a military thing to do, which was not what the Sergeant Handbook version of himself would have recommended. But the child was very small and he was very large, and there is a physics to grief, a spatial logic, that sometimes demands that you find a way to be at eye level. "What's your name?" he asked. Another pause. The antennae stirred. "Lyra," she said. "Lyra Vel Ashan." I am the third daughter of Minister Kael Velashan of the House of Twilight Shores. The name hit him somewhere in the chest with a specific and particular force, and it took him a moment to understand why, and then he understood why. Her last name was his first name, that was all. A coincidence that meant nothing, a collision of sounds across two languages that had never been meant to meet. He knew it meant nothing. He felt it means something anyway, because that is what it is to be human, to find patterns in chaos and call them signs, to reach for meaning in a universe that distributes it carelessly and without warning. Lyra, he said, I'm Darius, and I promise I'm going to take you somewhere safe. Her antennae rose to the full upright position, which his module tagged simply as believing you. Behind him, he heard Reese and Dressler moving carefully toward the two human survivors, activating warming packs, beginning the careful work of bringing the cocoons to full operational temperature. Beside him, Lyra Velashan, third daughter of a dead minister, alone in the wreckage of a ship that had been meant to carry her somewhere safe, reached out her small, luminescent hand and placed it with great deliberateness on top of his. She said nothing. She did not need to. The bioluminescence at her touchpoint pulsed in a color his module rendered as something close to the word anchor. He stared at that small hand on top of his large one, and he felt, for the first time in 19 months, the specific shock of being needed by something alive. He would not yet call it anything. He would not yet name the thing that shifted in his chest. He had learned, in the months after New Corinth, the danger of naming things too quickly, of hoping too publicly. But he covered her hand with his, gently, the way you cover something fragile and precious. And he said, "We're going to move now. Stay close to me." And she did. Rising tension and development. Part 1. The Minnow. They brought the Minnow back to the GTAS Ironclad through 2 hours of careful navigation around debris, with the two human survivors secured in the medical bays and Lyra seated in the co-pilot's harness, which was several sizes too large for her, held in by a webbing of straps that Torres had improvised with the specific creative efficiency of someone who had been working solutions for inadequate equipment for the better part of a decade. Lyra sat very still during the transit. She did not speak. She did not sleep. She watched everything with those wide, light-sensitive eyes, and every time the Minnow made a sound she did not recognize, the slight groan of the hull adjusting, the cycling of the navigation jets, the automated ping of the proximity alert, her antennae would spike upward and then, after a moment, settle again. She was taking inventory. Kael recognized it because he had done the same thing in every new environment for the last 19 months. When you had lost everything, you learned to categorize everything around you by whether it constituted a threat. It was exhausting. He suspected she already knew that. "The ship ahead is ours," he said, when the Ironclad appeared on the viewport. "It's called the Ironclad. It's a GTA vessel, which means it's under human command, but we have Aelhari diplomatic liaisons aboard, so you won't be the only one." He paused. "I thought you should know that." Her antenna moved toward him, which his module had started to interpret as a kind of conversational orientation, like turning your head to look at someone. "Were your liaisons on the Serene Path?" she asked. "No. Different posting." "Then they did not know my mother." "Probably not." A silence. Then, "She had a very particular way of greeting people. She would take both their hands, even if they were very large humans, and her hands were quite small, and she would press them together between her own, and she would say, 'The path of peace has no end, and it has no beginning,' which is the Aelhari greeting reserved for diplomatic and formal circumstances. But she said it to everyone, even maintenance workers, even—" She stopped. The bioluminescence on her forearms did something complex and quiet. "It's okay," Kael said. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said, with a firmness that surprised him. "I want to say it. I do not want to be quiet about her." Her antennae were fully upright. "She taught me that silence about the people we love is not the same as protecting their memory. It is only absence dressed as dignity." He did not have anything to say to that. He found he did not need to. He simply nodded and kept his eyes on the approach to the ironclad and let her talk. She talked for the remainder of the flight about her mother, who had been a diplomat of 20 years and had believed, with a conviction that apparently everyone around her found both admirable and occasionally exhausting, that the Kreth Dominion could be brought to the negotiating table. About her father, who was currently on Aelhari homeworld Velshara and did not know yet what had happened to the Serene Path. About her two older sisters, who were 11 and 13 in Aelhari years, which translated to something between 16 and 19 by human count, and who had stayed behind on Velshara because the mission to the Velani Drift had been expected to last only 3 standard days. About the lessons she was supposed to be completing while aboard the ship. She was working through a series on galactic cartography, which she found deeply satisfying, and on political philosophy, which she found slightly less satisfying because, as she put it, political philosophy seemed to consist largely of people arguing about what words meant. She talked the way children talk when they have been holding silence so long that the silence itself becomes unbearable. She talked because there was still something alive in her that needed to prove it was alive. He listened. He had not, he realized, listened to someone talk in a very long time. Not the way she meant him to listen, not with the part of himself that was still reachable. When they docked with the ironclad and the bay doors sealed behind them and she finally went quiet, settling back into the too large harness, as if the talking had used up the last of a reserve she had been carefully managing, he sat for a moment with his hands on the controls and did not move. "Kael," Torres said from the seat beside him. Her voice had a particular quality he recognized. Careful, precise. The voice she used when she was about to say something she had been sitting with for a while. "She's alone. I know. The Aelhari diplomatic liaisons aboard are going to be notified. GTA protocol for civilian survivors is humanitarian processing, temporary quarters, family notification. I know the protocol, Torres. I'm not reciting the protocol at you. I'm telling you." She stopped, started again. "She held your hand for the whole trip. She stopped talking when you stopped responding, and she started again when you looked at her. She's not holding on to the protocol, Darius. She's holding on to you." He had no answer for that either. "Let me get them to medical," he said. "Then we'll see." Part 2. The Ironclad, Day 1 through 4. The Ironclad was a Haxton-class assault carrier, which meant it was built primarily for combat operations and secondarily for everything else, with a medical bay that was excellent, quarters that were functional, and common areas that were exactly as warm and inviting as a metal box in space could be made to feel by people who were doing their level best with grey walls and recycled air. Lyra was assigned a standard civilian recovery suite on Deck 4, a small, clean space with a bunk, a desk, a terminal, and a viewport that showed, depending on the ship's current orientation, either open space or a very good section of starfield. The Aelhari diplomatic liaison who came to see her was a young male named Sende, who had the polished bearing of someone trained in cross-species relations and the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone who had just been told he was the senior liaison because the other two were on leave. Kael was not technically required to be present for that meeting. He was present anyway in the corridor outside the open door, because that was where his feet had carried him, and he had not thought of a reason to override them. He could hear Sender through the door, speaking in the careful, formal register of official Aelhari, the kind used in diplomatic circles rather than in households. He could hear Lyra responding, her voice pitched lower than it had been in the shuttle, the bioluminescence presumably more controlled. She was code-switching. He knew that behavior from human children who learned to be one thing in one context and another thing in another context. She was being the minister's daughter in there, the diplomatic third daughter of Minister Kael Velashan. She was being composed. He did not go in. He leaned against the corridor wall with his arms folded and stared at a point on the opposite bulkhead and thought about nothing in particular, which was the closest he usually got to thinking about things in general. When Sunder came out, he nearly walked into Kael's shoulder. "Sergeant," he said, recovering with the smoothness of someone trained to recover from surprises gracefully. "I was not aware you would be—" "How is she?" Kael asked. Sender paused. He looked at the door, then at Kael, with the expression of someone calibrating carefully. "She is—" He made a small gesture, the kind that crossed species barriers because it was essentially just the physical expression of a long pause. "She is exercising a great deal of self-control. Her light is very dim for an Aelhari child of her developmental stage. This is typical in acute grief response, but it indicates she is suppressing significantly. She talked for almost 2 hours straight in the shuttle. That would be consistent. Acute verbal processing, followed by withdrawal." He looked at Kael again. "She mentioned you, specifically, by name. We were together in the wreck for—" "No, Sergeant. She mentioned you as a specific reference point. As in, Darius said we would be safe. Darius said the ship was safe. Darius said—" Sender tilted his head. "For Aelhari children, the naming of a specific individual in that context has significance. It means she has identified you as a source of felt safety. It is not simply gratitude or familiarity. It is, the Aelhari would call it, taking root. She has begun to grow toward you the way young organisms grow toward light." Kael's jaw tightened. He knew what the man was telling him. He understood it on a level beyond language. "I'm a Marine, Sende. I'll be redeployed in—" "I know," Sende said gently. "I am not telling you what to do. I am telling you what is happening." Kael was very quiet for a moment. "Can I see her?" Sende stepped aside. He knocked on the open door, a human habit that felt right regardless of its necessity, and Lyra looked up from where she was sitting at the desk with a blank terminal screen in front of her, not working, just sitting. Her antenna lifted immediately. The light at her fingertips pulsed once in that color he had started to think of as hers specifically. The uncertain asking shade, the one that said she was not yet sure what something meant. "You stayed," she said. "I said I would take you somewhere safe. The work's not done until you are." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I would like to continue my cartography lessons. The terminal in here has access to the academic network, and my module files are still in my personal data store, which I had with me when—" A pause, a deliberate steadying. "May I ask you something?" He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bunk, which placed him approximately at her eye level. "You can ask me anything you want. Do you have family? Children?" He had known the question was coming, in the way that you know certain questions are coming, in the same way you know certain weather. You can feel the pressure changing. You cannot stop it. "I had a daughter," he said. "Her name was Maya. She was 4 years old. She and her mother, my wife Selene, they were in a civilian residential quarter on New Corinth when a Kreth strike drone hit the district. I was deployed at the time." He stopped. He waited for the feeling to pass through him like weather, the way he had learned to wait for it. "It happened 19 months ago." Lyra Velashan looked at him for a long time. Her antennae were very still. Her bioluminescence had shifted to a color he had not yet catalogued. Deep and slow, something between the blue his module tagged as sorrow and the warm amber it tagged as connection, something that had no single word translation because he was beginning to understand the Aelhari emotional palette was considerably larger than any module could adequately map. "Then you are alone also," she said. "Yes, I am glad it was you," she said very quietly. "Who came for me? I am glad it was someone who understands what it is to be in the dark and waiting." He could not speak for a moment. That was all right. She did not seem to need him to. "I have decided," she said, with the composure that kept breaking his heart a little more each time she deployed it, "that I will not be sad only. I will also be grateful for what I had. My mother taught me that." She said the Aelhari have a word, Velhari, which means the warmth that remains after the light source is gone, like the warmth in a stone after the sun sets. "I am going to practice Velhari." "That's," he said, and stopped, and tried again. "That's a good word. I wish I had had that word 19 months ago." "You can have it now," she said simply. "It is not a word you have to earn." He stayed for 3 hours. They talked. She showed him her cartography lessons, which were genuinely sophisticated for her age level, and he told her about the systems he had traveled through in his service, the ones that matched what she was studying. She had questions about everything. The rate at which she asked questions was slightly dizzying. He found himself giving detailed answers because her follow-up questions caught the vague answers every time, and after a while he stopped giving vague answers and simply answered with what he actually knew. When he left, her antenna tracked him to the door. The next 3 days established something that neither of them named. He came to see her in the mornings, briefly, before his duty rotation. He came again in the evenings, longer. He brought her meals from the commissary. When the ship's automated delivery was slow, because he had noticed she did not eat when food was not brought to her directly, she would not seek it out herself, which Sende told him was a grief response common in Aelhari children who lost initiative for self-care when their established caregiving patterns were disrupted. He brought her food, and she ate it, and she thanked him with a formality that was gradually, over the course of those 3 days, becoming slightly less formal. On the second day, she called him Darius instead of Sergeant Kael. On the third day, she asked if she could sit in the common area outside her quarters in the afternoons, and he arranged it, and he sat with her for the part of it when he was off duty, and she worked on her lessons, and he did paperwork at the table beside her, and it was quietly and specifically the most ordinary thing he had done in 19 months, and he did not examine it too closely because examining things too closely had not served him well. On the fourth day, the message arrived from GTA Command. Part 3. The Bureaucracy of Loss. Agzer Smard Sia Forley. Commander Ellison Gray was the Ironclad's executive officer, a thin man with a manner that suggested he found most things slightly beneath his attention, while simultaneously being incapable of ignoring them. He called Kael into his office mid-afternoon on day 4, with the particular tone in his voice that meant paperwork was about to become someone's problem. "She's not just a civilian survivor," Gray said, sliding a datapad across the desk. "She is the only surviving member of an official Aelhari diplomatic mission, which means GTA Command has been in contact with the Aelhari Council of Aligned Worlds about her status." Kael read the order on the datapad. His jaw did what it did when he was controlling an expression. "They want her transferred to interstellar humanitarian processing. It's the protocol. Station Helix 7. She'll be given a placement determination. Family notification will be sent through official channels. Her father is on Velshara. He doesn't know his daughter is alive. Send him a direct message through the diplomatic relay. It takes 40 minutes. Sergeant, that's not a protocol that requires Helix 7. That's a message." Gray looked at him with the expression of a man who had expected this particular conversation to go differently. The family determination process also has to establish whether the father has guardianship capacity at present. He is a private citizen on a homeworld that has just experienced a diplomatic catastrophe and is under significant political pressure. The Aelhari government has indicated that several noble houses have expressed interest in taking guardianship of the minister's children as a... "She has a father," Kael said. "Yes, and until his situation is assessed and confirmed, she is in an administrative gray area, which means she is a child who just lost her mother and has been alone in the wreckage of a ship for God knows how long before we got there. And you are talking to me about administrative gray areas." Gray's expression did not change significantly, but he folded his hands on the desk in a way that suggested he was choosing his next words with care. "I understand this is personal for you, Sergeant. Your record is annotated. I'm aware of what happened on New Corinth. This has nothing to do with New Corinth, doesn't it?" The question sat in the room with the particular weight that accurate observations sometimes had. "She is being transferred to Helix 7, Gray said. "That is the order. The transfer shuttle arrives in 16 hours. Kael stood. He put the datapad back on Gray's desk with the careful, controlled motion of someone who knows that the alternatives to careful and controlled are currently inadvisable. "I'll inform her," he said. "Sergeant." Gray waited until Kael turned. "I can request to have your rotation amended so that you have accompanied transit authorization. You would be aboard the transfer vessel. You could go with her as far as Helix 7, it was. Coming from Grey, the closest thing to kindness he was likely to offer. Yes, Kael said, do that. He went directly from Grey's office to Deck 4. She knew something had happened the moment he came through the door. He was not certain how she knew, whether it was some biosign he was broadcasting that an Aelhari could read, or whether she simply had the hyper-attuned sensitivity to change in caretaker behavior that all children developed when they had lost enough to make them afraid of losing more. Her antennae dropped to half-mast. The light at her fingertips went that dim, flickering amber of uncertainty. I have to tell you something, he said, and I want to tell you all of it, not just part of it, because I think you deserve all of it. Can we sit down? They sat on the floor. He had noticed she preferred the floor to the furniture, which Torres had told him was typical for Aelhari children in unfamiliar spaces. Furniture was culturally specific in a way that floor was not, and floor was universal, and universal felt safer. He sat on the floor with her, the two of them cross-legged, face to face. He told her about Helix 7. He told her about the process, what it would involve, the time frames, the family determination. He told her that her father would be notified through official channels and that when the determination was complete and her father confirmed as her guardian, she would go to Velshara. He told her he would be on the transfer shuttle. She listened to all of it. Her antenna did not move much. The bioluminescence was controlled, careful. She was being the diplomat's daughter again. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Helix 7, she said finally. Is it safe? It's a GTA humanitarian station. It's safe. Will there be other Aelhari? Almost certainly. Will you visit? He had not been prepared for that one, which was not correct. He had known it was coming, in the same way he had known all the other questions were coming. He had simply hoped, unreasonably, that the hoping would change the answer. I don't know, Lyra. My deployment schedule. I understand about deployment schedules, she said, with the dignity that still wrecked him. My mother was frequently away. I understand that work requires presence in specific locations and specific times, and that presence in one location means absence from another. A pause. I only asked if you would visit, not if you would stay. I'll try, he said. I'll genuinely try. Her antennae rose slightly, not to full height, but slightly. It was the compromise between belief and self-protection that all sentient beings learned to practice when they had been hurt enough times. May I ask you something else? She said. Always. Maya, your daughter, what was she like? He had not talked about Maya to anyone. He had been asked, by therapists the GTA required him to see, by Torres once and never again after the look on his face the first time, by a chaplain who had meant well. He had refused every time, because talking about Maya required a specific opening in himself that he had sealed shut the way you seal an airlock in a hull breach, for survival, not because it was right. He looked at Lyra's antenna, half-raised, hopeful and cautious in equal measure. She was 4, he said. She was extremely stubborn. She had a very specific opinion about which spoon was her spoon, and no other spoon was acceptable. She had learned 17 words in Aelhari from a children's learning program that Selene had bought, and she would use them on me at maximum volume and maximum confidence, regardless of whether they were contextually appropriate. He stopped, and the stopping hurt, and he let it hurt. She called stars little fires in the ceiling because she had decided that space was a very big room and the stars were just the room's lights being small. Lyra's bioluminescence moved through something complex and beautiful, something his module did not even attempt to categorize. It just flagged it as insufficient data for translation, which felt right, because some things that are felt deeply cannot be translated without losing what makes them feel like that. She sounds like she was wonderful, Lyra said. She was. I think, she said very carefully, that she would not want you to only be Velhari. I think she would want you to also still be warm yourself, not just to hold her warmth, but to have your own. He looked at this child, this alien child in a too small cabin on a warship, 6 or 7 years old by the measure of her own species, who had lost her mother in a fireball in space 48 hours ago and was sitting on the floor talking to a broken-down Marine about what his dead daughter would have wanted for him. "I think," he said, when he could speak, "that you might be the wisest person I have ever met." Her antennae went to full upright for just a moment before she caught them and brought them back to dignified half-height. She did not say what the antenna said, but he had learned to read them a little. They said, "You are the first person who has said that to me today, and I needed it very much." Part 4. What the transfer shuttle carried. 16 hours came and went. The transfer shuttle, GTA Civilian Transit Vessel Waypoint, was a fat, slow ship, built for comfort and capacity rather than speed, with soft lighting and passenger cabins designed to feel less like moving through space and more like moving through a well-appointed hotel that happened to be able to survive hard vacuum. Torres came to see them off at the bay. She handed Lyra a small package, handmade clearly, wrapped in the silver foil that was all she would have had access to on a warship. "I made you something," she said, in the slightly gruff way of a person who was not accustomed to making things for people and had done it anyway. "It's a star chart. Your section of one anyway, the part around the Velani Drift. I marked the place where we found you, and I marked the ironclad's current position, and I marked Velshara, so you can see where you've been and where you're going." Lyra received it with both hands, which Kael had come to understand was an Aelhari gesture of full acceptance. Using one hand for a gift implied you were considering refusing it with the other. With both hands there was no ambiguity. "Thank you," she said. Her bioluminescence pulsed once, warm and clear, in the color his module simply rendered as genuine. "I will keep it always." Torres, who was not the most demonstrative of people, managed something that was almost a smile. She looked at Kael. The look said approximately 12 things that neither of them needed to say out loud. The transit to Helix 7 took 31 hours. During those hours, Lyra slept more than she had on the ironclad. The soft lighting and the vibration of the transit drive seemed to settle something in her that the ironclad's harder edges had kept alert. She slept in the cabin bunk, and he worked at the desk outside, on the same paperwork he had been doing for 6 months without completing it. The administrative burial process for 2 people on New Corinth, which required forms and filings and official recognitions that he had been too empty to submit. He submitted them during those 31 hours. He did not know why he was able to do it then and not before. He thought, and then decided not to think too much about it. When she was awake, they talked. She asked about human history, which she knew in the academic way of someone who had studied it in a diplomatic context, and he told her about it in the other way, the way it felt to be inside it, the mess and the noise and the contradictions of being a species that had managed to build civilization in the cracks between catastrophes. She found this deeply interesting. She said that the Aelhari historical tradition tended to frame progress as linear, but human history sounded more like what she called in Aelhari, a word his module rendered as the path of many falls and many standings. "That's," he said, "actually very accurate. My mother would have said that the capacity to fall and stand is more interesting than the capacity to simply walk steadily. She said the species with the most interesting scars had the most interesting things to say." Did she think humans were interesting? Lyra's antenna moved. She thought humans were the most interesting thing to happen to galactic civilization in 300 years. A pause. She also thought you were collectively very loud and somewhat difficult to negotiate with because you tended to argue about principles when you meant to argue about interests. She wasn't wrong. On the 29th hour, Kael received a message on his personal comm. It was flagged from GTA Diplomatic Intelligence, which was a flag he did not see often, and he stepped away from Lyra's cabin to read it in the small communications alcove at the end of the corridor. He read it twice. Then he stood in the alcove for a moment, with his hand on the wall and his eyes on the floor. Then he went back to Lyra's cabin, knocked and entered. She looked up from her cartography lesson. Her antennae read him immediately. They went to full alert before he had said a word. "Something has happened," she said. It was not a question. Yes, He sat across from her. He held the datapad loosely in one hand, the way you hold something you need to deliver carefully. This is from GTA Diplomatic Intelligence. They've been running an investigation into what happened to the Serene Path. He paused. Lyra, the attack was not random. The Serene Path was targeted specifically. She was very still. By the Kreth. Yes. But, and I need you to listen carefully, the intelligence indicates that the target was not your mother's diplomatic mission as a whole. The attack was aimed at preventing a specific individual from reaching a specific destination. The stillness deepened. Me, she said. Your mother was the third daughter of the House of Ashan, but you are the third daughter of your mother, which means by the Aelhari line of succession as it applies to the house's diplomatic standing. I know what it means, she said quietly. My mother explained it to me when I was very young. It is why she was always so careful about where she took me. It is why she did not bring my sisters. Her antenna dropped, slowly, not to the frightened press-flat position, but to something different, the weighted, downward angle of someone absorbing a weight they had been prepared to expect. She was taking me to the Valani Drift to meet with the Aligned Council's Outer Territories representatives. If I had attended that meeting, I would have formally been recognized as the heir to my mother's diplomatic position, which means I would have had standing in the council, which means the Kreth wanted me gone before I had standing. Yes, and now I have standing anyway, she said, because I am the only survivor, which means she is gone, and the council will recognize it, and the Kreth have achieved the opposite of what they wanted. Her bioluminescence, which had been dim through all of this, did something unexpected. It brightened sharply, for just a moment, in a color his module flagged as something it rendered, inadequately, as defiant sorrow. She would have found that very satisfying, Lyra said. She had a great appreciation for irony. He watched her. He watched the light move on her. He was learning to read it the way you learn to read weather. Not perfectly, not with certainty, but well enough to know when something important was happening. What you're also saying, she said after a moment, is that I am not safe, that the Kreth will try again, because I have the standing now whether they want me to or not. That's what I'm saying. And Helix 7 is a humanitarian station. It is not a defended installation. No, he said. It is not. She looked at him steadily. Her antennae were at a perfect, controlled, diplomatic angle. She looked, in that moment, so much older than she had any right to look, and so much younger simultaneously, and it was the combination of those two things that hit him hardest. What are you going to do? She asked. Everything I can, he said. Climactic moment, Part 1. Helix 7. Station Helix 7 was shaped like its name, a spiraling helix of interconnected habitat rings, wide enough to house 3,000 residents at full capacity, equipped with the kind of amenities that made long-term humanitarian processing as tolerable as it could be made. It had medical facilities, educational centers, common areas, and administrative blocks. It did not have a military garrison. It had security personnel, which was not the same thing, and it had GTA oversight, which was also not the same thing. Kael filed 7 separate requests in the 12 hours between receiving the intelligence briefing and arriving at Helix 7. He filed them with GTA Command, with GTA Diplomatic Affairs, with the Aelhari Council of Aligned Worlds through the official liaison channel, with the Interstellar Security Directorate, and with 2 commanding officers he had served under who still returned his messages. He filed for threat assessment review, for security detail authorization, for Lyra Velashan to be formally reclassified from civilian humanitarian case to diplomatic protected person, and for an expedited direct channel family notification to be sent to her father on Velshara. He received 3 automated acknowledgements, 2 holding messages, and 1 call from an ISD duty officer who told him the threat assessment was being processed and processing times were currently 12 to 16 standard days. He submitted an urgent review request. The duty officer told him, politely, that all review requests were currently subject to the same 12 to 16-day window. He did not throw anything. He was proud of himself for this. When the waypoint docked with Helix 7, and they processed through arrival with the 47 other humanitarian cases aboard, Lyra walked beside him through the corridors with her small travel case and her star chart wrapped in silver foil, and she said nothing about the 12 to 16 days, and she said nothing about the Kreth, and she said nothing about the intelligence briefing. She asked him questions about the architecture of the station, whether the helix rotation was continuous or segmented, how the gravity systems in each ring coordinated, whether the material of the outer hull was the same as what she had seen on the ironclad. He answered every question. He kept her talking because he knew she was doing the same thing in reverse, keeping him present, giving him something to respond to, making herself a point of contact in a situation where the alternative was standing alone in a processing queue and feeling the distance between herself and everything she had known widening like a hull breach. They processed her into her assigned quarters on Ring 4. The room was slightly larger than the one on the ironclad, and it had a curved viewport that showed the station's exterior ring and, beyond it, the stars. She stood at the viewport for a long time. He stood at the door. "I have to report to the station administrative office," he said. "Military personnel accompanying civilian transfers have a reporting protocol. I'll be back." She turned from the viewport. "How long?" "An hour, maybe 2. She nodded. Her antennae were at the half-height of careful hope. "I will work on my lessons," she said. "Good. I'll bring food when I come back." "You always bring food. You always eat it when I do." Her antenna went fractionally higher. He went to the administrative office. He reported in. And then, instead of coming back in an hour, he used that hour to go to the office of the station commander, a no-nonsense woman named Director HFY, who had spent the last 15 years running humanitarian processing facilities and had the kind of thorough exhaustion in her eyes that came from caring about something bureaucratic systems were specifically not designed to support. He put the intelligence briefing on her desk. He put his 7 filed requests beside it. He told her, in the direct language of someone who was done with careful framing, what the threat assessment indicated and what 12 to 16 standard days meant in terms of a child who had already been targeted once, sitting in an undefended installation. Director Ven read the briefing. She read it again. She looked at Kael across the desk with the expression of a person who had expected today to be moderately difficult and was now recalibrating. "I can put her on a restricted access status," she said. "Her quarters can be locked to biometric entry. I can request a GTA security presence from the nearest posting, which is the Meridian Outpost, 14 hours away." She tapped the data pad. "The threat level in this report, Sergeant, if this is accurate, it's DI-grade intelligence. It's accurate. Then restricted access and a 14-hour away security presence is not." "No, it is not." She set down the data pad. "You are staying on this station." It was not a question. He confirmed it anyway. "I have a 10-day transit authorization before I'm required to report back to the ironclad," he said. "I'll be here for 10 days. If the threat assessment comes back in 12 to 16 days, that leaves a gap. I can apply for an extension of your authorization through administrative necessity." "Yes." "And the child's father?" "I want that notification sent today. Not through official channels, through the emergency diplomatic relay. Today." Ven looked at him for a long moment with the practiced assessment of someone who had spent 15 years deciding what people were actually asking for under the surface of what they said they were asking for. "You pulled her out of that wreck yourself," she said. "Yes, and you've been her primary point of contact since." "Yes, and you lost a child of your own." She said it quietly, not as an accusation, not even as an observation with attached meaning, just as a fact that was in the room with them and might as well be named. "Yes," he said. She nodded. She stood. She picked up the datapad and her comm unit and moved toward her office door. "I'll send the notification to Velshara today," she said, "and I'll apply for your authorization extension, and I'll make the call to Meridian Outpost myself." She paused at the door. I'll also make a note in her administrative file, under supplemental caregiver contacts. He understood what she was telling him. Thank you, he said. Part 2. The night of the 9th day. 9 days passed. They were not quiet days, exactly. Helix 7 had the constant ambient noise of a station, the hum of the life support cycling, the voices of 3,000 residents in the corridors, the announcement chimes, the hydraulic shifts of the ring rotation. But they were days of a particular texture, and that texture was new to him, new enough to notice, new enough to sit with. He brought her meals. He sat with her lessons. Galactic cartography had progressed from its theoretical modules into applied navigation, and she had begun drawing her own charts with the station's mapping software, plotting routes through systems she had never been to, and explaining her reasoning in detail that was genuinely impressive for her developmental level. He listened. He asked questions when he had them, which was often, because it turned out that watching someone work through something they genuinely loved had a way of generating questions in an observer. She asked him on the 3rd day to teach her something, anything he knew. He thought about it for longer than she probably expected him to. Then he taught her to tie a knot, a basic field knot, the kind used to secure equipment, simple enough that it could be done in the dark, in gloves, in the kind of conditions where simplicity was survival. He did not know why he chose that particular thing. He thought it might be because it was something Maya had asked him to teach her once, and he had said he would, and then deployment had come before he got the chance. He showed her the loop and the over and under and the tuck and pull. Her 3-fingered hands were different from his, the joints in different places, and she had to find a modified version of the motion that worked for her anatomy. It took her the better part of an afternoon. When she finally got it, when the knot held on the 3rd pull test, she looked up with her antennae at full height and her bioluminescence blazing in a color his module now confidently tagged as Triumph, and she said, "I want to learn another one." He laughed. He had not laughed in 19 months and 27 days. It came out of him like something that had been held underwater and finally surfaced. It did not sound the way he remembered laughing sounding. It sounded rougher and more surprised. But Lyra's antennae went immediately to full alert, and then to the highest position he had yet seen them reach, which his module tagged as a sound that makes me feel something I don't have a single word for. "That is a good sound," she said, with enormous gravity. It felt strange, he admitted. "All things feel strange the first time after a long time without them," she said. "That is normal. My mother told me that once, about grief. She said, joy is not a betrayal of sorrow. It is simply sorrow making room." He looked at her for a long moment. "She was remarkable," he said. "Not about Lyra, about the mother who had raised her." "Yes," Lyra agreed, without false modesty or excessive sentiment. "She was exactly that." On the 6th day, a message arrived from Velshara, her father. He had known. The official notification had been sent, as promised, but this was his personal message, not the official acknowledgement, and she spent the entire morning reading it and rereading it and writing her response, and Kael gave her the space for that, without being asked. When she came to find him in the afternoon, her bioluminescence was at a level of brightness he had not yet seen, warm and complex and alive in a way that made the space around her feel different. "He cried," she said. "He told me he cried for 2 hours when they told him, and then he wrote to me for 3 hours. He wrote more than I have ever received from him at once. He said he is doing everything he can to come. He said the political situation on Velshara is complicated because of the diplomatic aftermath of the Serene Path incident, but he is doing everything he can." She paused. "He asked about you. Sender sent him a summary report of my recovery and transit, and he asked about the human soldier who brought me out of the wreck." "What did you tell him?" She considered this with the deliberateness she brought to all things she considered important. "I told him that you were the first warm light after the dark. That is the Aelhari phrase for someone who is present in the moment when presence is everything." She looked at him. "I also told him that you are lonely and that you are working on being less so." He made a noise that was approximately halfway between surprised and something with no name in either of their languages. "I hope you do not mind," she said, not sounding entirely as if she had expected him to. He said, "No, I don't mind. He said he would like to speak with you himself, when arrangements can be made." "I would like that," he said, and found that he meant it. On the night of the 9th day, 2 hours after Lyra had gone to sleep, the station proximity alarms went off. Kael was in the residential common area outside Ring 4 when it happened, reviewing his filing status on his personal terminal, the authorization extension still pending, the threat assessment still in processing, and he was on his feet before the second alarm cycle completed. Because certain reflexes do not require conscious activation, the station-wide announcement came 12 seconds later. Director Ven's voice, controlled and precise. "All personnel, this is a security alert. An unregistered vessel has appeared in our proximity zone. Security teams, initiate Protocol 7. All civilian residents, secure to quarters immediately. This is not a drill." He was already running. He reached Ring 4 in 45 seconds. Lyra's door was biometric locked, but she had given him the secondary access code 3 days in. He had not asked for it. She had simply given it to him. He cycled it open. She was awake. Of course she was awake. Every alarm on the station would be detectable to Aelhari biorhythm sensitivity even through sleep. She was standing in the center of the room with her antennae at maximum alert, her bioluminescence cycling in rapid, complex patterns that his module could not fully pass, but that he did not need a module to understand. She was scared. She was holding it with every bit of discipline she had, but she was scared. "With me," he said. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere more defensible. Move." He had spent 9 days learning the station's layout with the specific intentionality of someone who already knew they might need to. He knew the service corridors, the emergency bulkhead locations, the maintenance access points. He knew the secure administrative core of Ring 4, which had reinforced walls and independent atmosphere and 2 entry points he could cover from 1 positions. He moved her through the service corridor at a pace calibrated to fast, without being so fast she lost contact with him. She kept her hand on his sleeve, not holding, just maintaining contact. The way you keep a hand on a wall in the dark. He could feel the slight warmth of that contact through his uniform. "What kind of ship?" she asked. She was not panicking. She was asking for information, the way someone trained to think in crises asks for information. "I don't know yet." Unregistered means they've got a signature mask, which is expensive, which narrows down who would spend that kind of resource on a station like this. "The Kreth," she said. "Possibly." "Move." They reached the administrative core. He secured the first entry point with the emergency override. A physical bolt, no electronics, the kind of failsafe that remained useful precisely because it could not be hacked. He stationed Lyra behind the central console where the angles of the room gave him the best coverage. His comm crackled. It was Ven, Sergeant Kael. Security identified the vessel. "It's a Kreth Rend-class intercept ship. Small crew, high maneuverability. They've gone dark. Propulsion shut down, minimal energy signature. They're trying to float into docking range undetected." "How long?" "At current drift rate? 22 minutes. I need the station's security team positioned at Ring 4 entry points, not general deployment, specifically Ring 4. I've already sent them, Sergeant. I've also transmitted a distress signal to Meridian Outpost. But 14 hours, I know. It doesn't matter right now. Secure Ring 4. He cut the channel. Lyra had not moved from behind the console. Her bioluminescence was controlled, dim, deliberate, the kind of light that did not draw attention from a distance. She had thought about that without being told. She had made herself dim on purpose. "They will board," she said. "Maybe. If they do, they'll have to get through the station security, the locked corridors, and me. In that order, I could help." He looked at her. "I can interface with the station's internal systems through this console," she said. "Aelhari diplomatic training. includes emergency network navigation. I can manipulate the internal corridor routing, seal or open bulkheads remotely, redirect power, activate the secondary alert systems that the main protocol leaves on standby. I can make the station very difficult to move through." He stared at her for 2 full seconds. "Can you also monitor their entry points? Tell me where they are?" "Yes." "Then do it, and stay behind the console." "Yes, sir," she said, with the absolute precise, crisp delivery of someone who had been paying close attention to how he gave orders and had decided that this was the correct register for this moment. He positioned himself at the first entry point and waited. The next 18 minutes were the kind of minutes that stretched into their own geometry, each one longer than a minute had any right to be, filled with the specific compound of readiness and silence that he had spent 8 years learning to inhabit. He heard the station security team take their positions in the corridor outside through his earpiece. He heard Ven directing traffic from the administrative center. He heard Lyra behind him, quiet and efficient, cycling through the station systems with a speed and confidence that he could hear in the rhythm of the inputs. No hesitation, no searching, just work. "They've docked," she said at minute 11. "Ring 6 external airlock, 3 biosignatures, 2 standard Kreth, 1 a pause. 1 that the station's sensors are reading as masked. Enhanced shielding, elite unit." "How do you know that from the station's sensors?" "The station's sensors are not trying to read through the shielding. I am." Another pause. "I have shut the Ring 6 bulkheads. They will have to go through maintenance access. That will add 7 minutes. Lyra, I have also activated the secondary alert system, which is broadcasting a disorienting frequency on the Kreth standard military comm band. Their internal communications will be degraded." She paused again. "That was my mother's idea. She had it built into all her diplomatic vessels. She said that the best negotiation happened when both parties were slightly uncomfortable." He made a sound that was, again, approximately halfway between surprised and something with no name. 7 minutes, he said. "Good, very good." What happened in those 7 minutes and the 7 minutes after was the kind of thing that happened in Kael's professional life regularly enough that he had stopped dramatizing it for himself, though it would be dramatized plenty by others later. The Kreth breach team reached Ring 4's outer entry point at minute 19. The station security team, positioned at his instruction, met them there. The engagement was short and decisive. Station security had the advantage of terrain, position, and preparation, and Kreth breach teams were built for intimidation and precision strike, not for extended engagements in corridor conditions with prepared defenders. The elite unit attempted to flank through a maintenance shaft. Kael was waiting. The conversation between them was brief and entirely one-sided. When it was done and the station alarms shifted from red to amber, he went directly back to the administrative core and opened the door. Lyra was still behind the console, still upright, still with her bioluminescence held carefully dim and controlled. When the door opened and she saw him, whole, uninjured, returning, her antennae went to the highest position he had ever seen them, and her bioluminescence blazed, just for 1 full, uncontrolled second, in a color that his module did not tag at all because it had no category for it. He did not need a category for it. He recognized it without help from the module. Relief. Pure, absolute, uncomplicated relief. The light that comes back on. She crossed the room in 3 steps and wrapped her arms around him, both of them, around his waist, her head at the height of his sternum, holding on with the grip of someone who had decided that whatever the appropriate protocols were for this moment, she was not interested in them. He put his arms around her, both of them, without thinking about it, without making a decision. The way you breathe, not because you chose to, but because the alternative was not thinkable. "I've got you," he said. It was what he had said in the wreck, when she had first come out from behind the storage unit. "I've got you." She did not speak. Her bioluminescence cycled slowly back to something warm and steady, the way a fire settles after its first bright burn. He held on. Part 3. The filing. He made 17 additional requests in the 48 hours after the breach. He filed them while Lyra slept, and while she worked, and while she ate the food he brought. He filed them with the urgency notations that the events of the 9th night retroactively justified, and this time the 12 to 16-day response windows compressed, because GTA bureaucracy did not move fast for good reason, but it did move fast when a documented Kreth incursion into a humanitarian station was on the incident report. He also requested a personal communication with Minister Kael Velashan of Velshara. It was granted within 6 hours. The minister appeared on the communication screen in the small conference room Ven had provided him, and Darius Kael looked at a man who was clearly his daughter's father, not in any way his module would have noted in a biosign, because Kael had learned by now that Aelhari physical resemblance was not something he could read reliably, but in the way he held himself, in the way his antennae moved with the specific care of someone who was managing several overwhelming things simultaneously and refusing to let any of them overwhelm him, in the way he said Darius Kael's name like he had been practicing it. "Sergeant," the minister said, "I have been told what happened on the 9th day, and what happened on the serene path before that. What you did." "I did my job," Kael said. "No," the minister said, gently and precisely. "You did more than your job. My daughter has told me what you did. Not just the actions, the person. She is—" He paused. The antenna dipped briefly and rose again. "She is not well. She will not be well for a long time. But she is less broken than she would have been. That is you." "She's an exceptional person," Kael said. "She would have found her way to less broken on her own eventually, perhaps. But eventually is a long journey and you shortened it." A pause. "I want to come for her as soon as the political situation permits. My government is in a period of significant disruption in the aftermath of the attack, and there are obligations I cannot presently leave. I expect it will be 4 to 6 weeks before I can travel." He looked at Kael steadily. "During that time, I would like her to remain where she is." Kael nodded. "The threat situation is more secure than it was, I know. I have read the full report. I am not concerned about security. I am concerned about continuity." Another pause. "She has told me about Aelhari. She told me she taught it to you, that you understood what it meant, that you needed it." The minister's bioluminescence shifted in a pattern that was complex and slow and beyond his module's full capacity, and Kael had the very distinct sense that what he was seeing was a parent doing what parents do, trying to know the person who had known their child when they could not. "I want her to remain near you," he said, "because you are Aelhari for each other, and I am not present to offer it myself, and I will not be for 6 more weeks, and she cannot afford to be without it." Kael opened his mouth to say something practical, something about his military rotation, his authorization, the administrative requirements. He had 7 things lined up. He had prepared for this conversation. He said none of them. "I've already filed for an extended secondary assignment authorization," he said. "Administrative necessity precedent triggered by the 9th day incident. It's pending." The minister's antennae rose to full height. "When will you know?" "I should hear within 48 hours. A silence. A silence of the particular kind that held warmth in it, rather than absence. "She said you laugh now," the minister said, "when you did not laugh before. She said you laugh, and it sounds surprised, as if you had forgotten you still knew how." Kael looked at the screen. "She notices everything," he said. "Yes," the minister agreed with great tenderness. "She does. It is both her gift and her inheritance." His antennae moved. "Sergeant Darius, she has told me she wishes to stay with you, not as a policy, not as a protocol. Personally, she has used the word she, the Aelhari word for chosen home, not a place, a person." He was very quiet. The room was very quiet. "I don't know what the right," he started. "I know you don't," the minister said. "I am not asking you to know. I am asking you to consider. When I take her back to Velshara, I would like to sit with you and consider it together. Whether there is a form that what you are to each other can take, formally, across species and distance, and the complicated machinery of 2 very different peoples. He paused. I owe you more than I can express in any language either of us speaks, but I want to give you more than gratitude. I want to give you the possibility of what this might become, if you want it. Darius Kael had been to the place beyond grief. He had lived there for 19 months. He had believed, with a certainty that had settled into him like cold into metal, that he would live there indefinitely. He looked at the minister. He thought about Aelhari. He thought about warmth remaining after the light source is gone. He thought about warmth that was not only stored warmth, warmth that was also current, present, generated by something alive. I want it, he said. It came out without strategy or preparation or careful framing. It came out like the laugh had come out, surprised, real, rougher than he would have designed. Whatever form it can take, I want it. The minister's bioluminescence brightened. Something his module tagged as peace. Not the peace of absence, not the peace of exhaustion, but the peace of something resolved. Then we will begin, he said. Emotional resolution. The authorization came through in 36 hours, which was, for GTA administrative processing, something close to miraculous. Director Venn called it an administrative necessity extension with secondary protective custody designation, which was a collection of words that meant he was staying, he told Lyra in the afternoon, in the common area, where she had arranged her ongoing cartography project across the low table so that it covered most of the surface, and she had to work around it in segments. She was adding annotations, little notations in Aelhari script, alongside the route markers, small observations that were not part of the official cartography data, but were hers. He had looked at them once, when she was resting, and the annotations that his translation module could process were things like, here there are 3 gas giants close enough together that they pull light, and here the debris field is shaped exactly like the word for patience in old Aelhari, which my mother taught me. He sat across from her and told her he was staying through her father's arrival. Her antennae went to full height immediately. Her bioluminescence did not wait for dignity. It blazed immediately in the color of triumph and stayed there for a full 3 seconds before she collected herself and brought it back to something more controlled. For 6 weeks, she said. At least 6 weeks, possibly more, depending on the situation. She looked down at her cartography project. She adjusted a marker annotation with great attention. I am very glad, she said, in a voice that was working hard at calm and not entirely succeeding. That is all. I am very glad. Me too, he said. A pause. I have been adding something to the chart, she said. I would like to show you, but only if you will not find it presumptuous. My mother always warned me that I could be presumptuous without intending to be, which is apparently a quality I share with my eldest sister, who once rearranged an entire state dinner's seating arrangement because she felt the current configuration was not optimally conducive to good conversation and was entirely correct, but was also considered quite rude. I don't think you've been rude once since I met you, he said. I was going to add you to the chart, she said, without preamble, having apparently decided that circumlocution was taking too long, not as a location, but as a notation, the way I have been noting things that are interesting and should be remembered. I was going to put your name next to the coordinates of the Aelhari drift, where you found me, because that is where you started. She looked at him with her antennae at the careful half-height of someone who was not certain of the ground they were walking on. And then I thought I might add a line, from those coordinates to wherever you are now, and wherever you will go, as a route, like a navigational record. He was quiet for a moment. You're charting me, he said. Only if it is acceptable. It's acceptable, he said. It's more than acceptable. She picked up her annotation tool and added something to the chart, with the focused efficiency of someone who had already prepared exactly what they wanted to say and was simply waiting for permission to say it. She turned it toward him at the coordinates of the Aelhari drift. In small, careful Aelhari script, she had written something his module rendered as, here is where the soldier came. He brought light back into the dark. He did not know he was doing it, which is the best kind of light. He looked at the annotation for a long time. You're going to make this very difficult, he said, Eventually, "I am going to make nothing difficult," she said, with great serenity. "You are going to make it difficult by not yet accepting that there are things you are allowed to want." He looked at her. "Your mother," he said. "She was remarkable." "Yes," Lyra said, "and I am going to be remarkable also when I am done grieving, which will take some time, and then also some more time after that, because she was very large in my life, and the space she has left is very large also. But I am going to fill it with cartography and with knots, and with—" She paused. Her antenna shifted. "With the people who stayed." The people who stayed. He had been to the place beyond grief, and he had believed it was a place you stayed, a final destination rather than a through station. He had believed, with every month that passed on New Corinth and after New Corinth, that the compass of his life had settled on a fixed point and would not move again. He had been wrong. He was, in the particular way that being wrong can sometimes feel, deeply grateful to be wrong. He reached across the table and placed his hand flat and open beside her annotation tool, a gesture, an invitation without demand. She looked at his hand. She looked at him. Her antenna rose to their full height. She placed her hand on top of his. The light at her fingertips pulsed. The anchor color, the one he had first seen in the wreck of the Serene Path, the one that had been the first thing he had felt in 19 months that had any weight to it. But it was different now. Not the desperate, alone, frightened quality of that first anchoring. Something steadier, something that had found its footing, something that was beginning. "I want to show you the rest of the chart," she said. "I have been mapping the outer drift systems, and I think you will find the navigational complexities quite interesting, even if you have not studied formal cartography." "I haven't studied formal cartography at all," he said. "I will teach you," she said simply. "That is what I will do." "Then I will learn," he said. They sat across from each other in the common area of Helix 7, with a cartography project between them and 6 weeks ahead of them and whatever came after that, and she began to explain the navigational logic of the outer drift in the patient, precise, demanding way of someone who expected her student to keep up, and he listened in the way he had relearned to listen, the way that used the part of himself that was still reachable, and the common area hummed with the noise of the station around them, and the stars turned outside the viewport, and the light from her hands made the space between them warm. He filed 4 more times over the following weeks. He filed for emergency guardianship review, for diplomatic cross-species secondary custody framework, for expedited documentation of the 6th-day breach at Helix 7 as justifying continued protective custody, and, on the morning of the 38th day, for formal co-guardianship consideration pending the ministerial family determination process. The minister arrived on day 42. He came through the docking bay with 2 diplomatic aides and the exhausted bearing of a man who had been keeping himself together across 400 light-years through sheer discipline. When Lyra saw him from the far end of the Ring 4 corridor, she broke into a run, the particular, abandoning run of a child who has decided that dignity can wait, and the light on her blazed so brightly that the module ceased trying to translate and simply logged it as exceptional bioluminescent event, which Kael thought was probably the most accurate way any machine had ever described the sight of a father and daughter finding each other after they had each believed it would not happen. He stood at the end of the corridor and let them have the moment. It was their moment. He had his own relationship to it, which was the relationship of someone who had become, over the course of 42 days, an essential part of the context in which this reunion was possible, and that was its own kind of fullness. The minister came to him afterward. His antennae were at a position Kael had not seen before, lower than diplomatic, higher than personal, some register in between that felt like it was its own specific category. "Minister," Kael said. "Darius," the minister said. He took both of Kael's hands, both of them large and rough from decades of service, held between his own smaller ones, and he said the words in Aelhari that Lyra had told him about. That day on the waypoint, the words her mother had said to everyone from heads of state to maintenance workers. "The path of peace has no end, and it has no beginning. He said it to a human soldier in a station corridor, and the words moved through Kael's translation module with imperfect fidelity. But he did not need the module. He had known for 42 days what those words meant, because a child had taught him, because she had been doing it quietly the whole time. "I have read your filings," the minister said, "all of them, with great attention." And the minister looked at him steadily, with his daughter at his side, her hand in his, her antennae tracking between the two of them, with the alert interest of someone who already knew what was going to be said, but wanted to watch it be said. And the minister said, "I would like to know if you would be willing to undergo the formal cross-species family registration process, which takes approximately 6 weeks and involves more administrative filings than I would wish on most living beings, but which is thorough for good reason." A pause. "And at the end of which, if the council approves and you are willing, you would be her anchor person, not instead of me, but alongside me. The Aelhari tradition has a word for it. One who holds a line from the other side of a great distance, so that the person between is never entirely without a fixed point." Darius Kael stood in the corridor of Helix 7, with the noise of the station around him and the stars turning beyond the hull, and a man he had known for 42 days through a communication screen asking him a question that was not about protocols or authorizations or documentation. It was about the thing that had happened in the wreck of the Serene Path, in the seconds when a frightened child had placed her hand on top of his and trusted him to be the person who came, the person who stayed. He had not had a word for it. He had been careful not to name it too quickly. "Yes," he said. He did not need more than one word for this either. "Yes, I'm willing." Lyra's bioluminescence blazed. It was the color of the light in a stone after the sun has set, the warmth that remains. Aelhari, except that was not quite right, because Aelhari was the warmth after the light was gone, and the light was not gone. It was here, with them, in this corridor, in this moment. It was present and alive and generating its own warmth, not stored from something lost but made fresh from something found. He thought, with a clarity that startled him, of Maya and what she had called the stars, little fires in the ceiling, she had said, because space was a very big room and the stars were the room's lights being small. He thought that she had not been wrong, exactly, only slightly imprecise. Space was a very big room, the lights were small, most of them. But there were moments, rare, unscheduled, undeserved in the way the best things were undeserved, when you were close enough to one of them to feel the warmth of it on your face. He looked at Lyra. Her antennae were at their full height. Her light was steady and clear. "Okay," he said, to all of them, to the minister, to the corridor, to the stars outside the hull, to the memory of everything that had been lost, and the presence of everything that was here. "Let's begin. The path of peace has no end. It has no beginning. It has only the next step, taken in the direction of something alive, and that is more than enough. That is everything.